Well, hello people, and welcome back to some more City Skylines 2 coverage. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Time for the 6th of the developer diaries. This time it's focusing on electricity and water. So let's have a little look through the video together and then the blog, and let's see if there's anything interesting here to pick out.
To understand the basic needs of your citizens, you need only look in the mirror. Like you and me, there are a few.
So there's a shot here of just New Dalton looking really good, but if you look over on the left, the level of detail pop in there is really bad. It almost actually looks worse than Cities 1. I'm assuming, of course, that's going to be machine and PC dependent, but just something to note, I think. Play-Doh buildings over on the left.
Few important things they need to live healthy, happy lives.
I do like how nice the residentials are looking though. So much more realistic, isn't it, than that crap Cities 1 vanilla stuff. Really nice. Although we are seeing snowmen out in the gardens when there's no snow though.
That includes electricity, water, and sanitation. With these systems in place, everyone in your city has a shot at living their best life. Let's take a look at electricity. When laying roads, you also install low-voltage underground cables that supply electricity to homes, offices, and shops. These cables plug into transformer stations. Transformer stations are also connected to the high-voltage power lines streaming from your city's power plants.
So that's interesting. The power now flows from production at the power plant through a high-voltage line before having to go through a transformer, be converted into low voltage power basically, and then that flows through underground power lines that are now in the roads. So the power mechanic has definitely been fleshed out a little bit more.
They act as a junction where low voltage cables and high voltage lines link up. Together, they form the grid that pumps electricity right across your city. There's one drawback. Power lines and electric cables can only carry so much electricity. When demand increases, they can max out, creating a bottleneck.
So that's interesting. Power will bottleneck, so no more is it a case of just waiting for those blue meshes to link together now, or just drawing across a simple little power line to link two areas together. Seems to be much more involved now, doesn't it? With the power utility, at least, we can experience power bottlenecks.
Keep the grid humming by evenly spreading electricity connections around your city. You can also build power lines to import electricity from neighboring cities. Imported energy will save your bacon if local power plants fail to produce enough electricity when demand increases.
So we know this from last week's dev diary about the import and export of resources.
It will, too. Expect spikes when the thermostat drops and everyone dials up their heaters. Hot weather will cause spikes too, as people flick on air conditioners, fans, and ice machines at the same time.
So that's cool. The seasonality mechanic in Cities 2 now is also going to affect power consumption. It's pretty realistic. Also, kind of notes there of snowfall's snowing mechanic and the heating mechanic. You know, you get more heat used when it's snowing and colder. So cool to see it more fleshed out, I guess.
Your power plants might produce more electricity than your city needs. When that happens, you can export it to your neighbors. While this can offset production costs, think it through. By storing excess electricity in emergency battery stations, you have nothing to worry about when demand rises. Emergency battery.
Just a note here, as this video is playing over, I'm much happier with how, I think we mentioned this again last time, didn't we? All the industrial infrastructure is just so much chunkier and grimier and dirty looking. Much happier with it compared to the vanilla CS1 coal power plant, for example.
Battery stations help your city get the most out of solar power plants.
See here that they're adding some of those new modular upgrades as well, adding new batteries, it looks like.
Battery stations power the city at night.
Oh, look at that water. That's so good. I know we fawned over this a couple of dev diaries ago, but look at the reflections in the water there, man. That's just so good. Like, so much better than CS1's graphics, isn't it? At least for the most part. You know, there's some things I do and don't like, but that water reflection, just consider the pickle very much tickled in that case.
When the plant isn't producing electricity, and recharge when they operate during the day. Of course, solar is just one renewable energy source. You can build wind, water, and geothermal.
Getting some shots there as well, the hydro dam looking really cool. This geothermal plant is looking really nice too. We did have someone mention in a comment last dev diary as well, the wonder if we're going to have to specifically place these geothermal plants to access basically pockets of geothermal heat, or whether or not we can just place them anywhere. Be interesting to see that.
Thermal power plants too. Fossil fuels are another way to power your city. Or you can go nuclear. Let's talk water and sanitation. Surface water sources are the same as in city skylines. Expect flowing rivers, glittering lakes, and vast, swirling oceans. Groundwater is different. These underground reservoirs replenish over time.
So we heard about this in last week's Dev Diary as well, these underground groundwater deposits. They will be siphoned away and slowly refill, so if you're pumping too much out of them, then they do have the ability to totally drain out and having to wait for them to refill. So again, seems the water utility has a lot more management involved in it now compared to CS1.
So they can run dry if they're drained at a faster rate than they're refilled. They're also susceptible to ground pollution. When they're contaminated, dirty water is pumped into your city's freshwater system.
I'm happy to see a much clearer polluted water icon here now as well, compared to what it was in CS1. It was just a sad face with the tiny little water glass next to it, wasn't it? Which confused quite a lot of people, I know in my community at least. So happy to see much clearer icons and what appears to be much nicer housing here as well. Look at some of these mansions in the foreground. I guess they're not really mansions, are they? They're just kind of more upper class family homes, but really nice. Again, back garden detailing, pools, washing lines, sheds, etc. Very nice.
That's bad on every level, mainly because decontamination.
So see here, another one of those modular upgrades coming in. An advanced filtering system will greatly reduce the amount of pollutants in the intake water. Pretty cool.
It takes a long time. Build a groundwater pumping station to tap this resource, and a water pumping station to bring surface water into your city's water system. You can also add water to the system with wastewater treatment plants.
That's really cool. Again, we're seeing that big modular upgrade system, adding buildings onto the size of the already existing facility. Really sweet.
These plants can process sewage.
That bridge as well. That's so nice. That's so cool. Love those big suspension arches. So like the truss arches underneath, sorry, not suspension arches, aren't they? But so much more cool looking infrastructure, isn't it?
To produce clean water for homes and businesses. There's another way to manage sewage. Sewage outlets. They release waste into open water, which can help prevent sewage from backing.
So again, we're seeing that water flow direction mechanic come back in. Nothing new here that we're not familiar with from Cities 1. You know, keep your sewage downstream from your intake. Pretty simple stuff.
Up. And that's a must when it comes to public health. Bungling waste management can make people seriously ill. That's why you want to keep sewage outlets well away from pumping stations. How can you balance the very human needs of citizens with your ambition as a city builder? It's simple. Imagine living your life down there, day in and day out.
Very nice. So nothing particularly groundbreaking there in the video. Let's head over to the blog now and see what's happening there, shall we? So as always, we'll skim over the blog and pick out anything that takes our interest. So just on the topic of producing electricity, we get confirmation of the return of specialised industries and the fact that the fossil fuel plants use coal, oil or gas to produce electricity, which can be produced locally in specialised industry areas, but also imported from outside connections. So here we get a little bit more information on the transformers and the fact we've got two types of electricity now in the game, low and high voltage, and how power lines are actually used to transfer the high voltage into those transformers, which will convert it into low voltage, which then flows through those low voltage cables that are automatically placed under our roads alongside the water pipes. And you can also transform high to low and also low to high. Here we get a view of one of the new battery assets, which is really cool. So an emergency battery station stores electricity by charging the batteries when the city's electricity production is higher than its consumption, allowing us to store electricity. When there is a lack of electricity in the city, the emergency battery station starts discharging the batteries automatically, which the batteries can be used in conjunction with solar power plant to power the city during the night, when obviously solar plants don't produce anything at all. So we're seeing some features of CS1 return there, the fact that, you know, solar power is going to dip during the night time, which is cool. Apart from now, we have the battery station to combat that. And wind turbines, nothing seriously is placed here. You need to make sure that you place them in windy spots in order for them to work properly. So here we get a view of the small core power plant for the first time, and unlike many of the other ones, this one cannot be upgraded. And of course, as coal power is going to produce a ton of pollution. So we're going to get a look at the natural gas plant, which looks really cool. This is the one we've seen quite a lot of in the trailers with these two big billowing smokestacks. Gas can be produced in the city using specialised industry to extract oil and then refine that into petrochemicals, but yeah, used by the power plant, which is nice. So you can produce that locally, which is cool. And we've seen this big upgradable coal plant before. Again, we can upgrade this one. Got these big coal storage next to it as well. I'm assuming this is going to be kind of like an aesthetic thing, but the more coal reserves you have, the higher this power will get. Kind of similar to how they work in the Industries DLC from Cities 1. So here's the geothermal plant. As a renewable energy source, the geothermal plant converts heat from deep underground, turning it into electricity. The plant doesn't need fuel to operate, but it requires groundwater deposits to function. So that's confirmation, we mentioned earlier, didn't we? Is it going to require a similar mechanic to the groundwater, where you have to place geothermal plants over, essentially, a geothermal deposit? That doesn't look like it's the case. They actually have to be placed over groundwater. The downside of this plant is that it is somewhat expensive to build and maintain, and it also pollutes the groundwater deposit, making it unusable for drinking water. So that's interesting. You can't share a same groundwater deposit if you want a geothermal plant over there. So this is quite interesting here as we come on to talk about the solar power. Its output depends on the time of day, which of course is pretty obvious, but also the latitude of the map will affect solar power. So again, that's going to be really interesting for building our cities, isn't it? If you're trying to build along with someone or maybe following the series, as I know a lot of people do with my build guides. If we're on different maps, we're going to experience different builds because the latitude is going to have an effect here too, which I find quite interesting and pretty cool as well. I like that mechanic. And a nice shot of the solar plant there as well. Much better looking than the CS1 solar plant, isn't it? Actual fields of solar panels. Very nice. And then of course nuclear power makes a return for CS1. It has no sort of air or ground pollution, just high noise pollution. And also recommended that we need a ton of water in order to keep it cool, of course. And I imagine this is going to be a pretty late game option, isn't it? But again, happy to see a much more realistic nuclear power plant here. We can see the reactor domes inside it. Really cool, nice buildings. I really like this shot here of the hydroelectric dam, which is really nice. So of course it's going to generate electricity by water flowing over it and functions as a renewable energy source that only produces noise pollution. See all these little sub buildings hanging off the dam as well. Really cool looking building, isn't it? I do think I'm going to get quite a lot of use out of the hydro dams in CS2. So now we come on to fuel logistics, where again it's mentioning that we can produce fuels locally using specialised industry, or it can be imported from outside connections too. So it says here that local fuel extraction will generate less truck traffic between the city and outside connections, of course. However, producing different fuel types locally is quite pollutive and takes up a lot of space. Obviously the pollution is a downside, but I don't really see this last point as a negative. The maps are significantly larger now, and I can't imagine space is really going to be an issue. It's never really been an issue in city skylines unless you're confined to vanilla 9 tiles, but that old system seems to have been done away with now, so I can't imagine this is going to be a serious problem. So now we come on to some of those upgrades that we saw in the video. So for example, the gas power plant has 4 different upgrades: a storage extension, an advanced furnace, an exhaust filter, and an additional turbine. Storage allows obviously to store more fuel. The advanced furnace is an operational upgrade that reduces the fuel consumption of the plant, while the exhaust filter will reduce the air pollution, and an additional turbine, as you would imagine, is going to increase the power output. So cool to get a bit more information on all those little modular upgrades we saw being added to the power plants in the videos. Cool shot here as well, some like yellow digger arms by the coal plant here, isn't it? Kind of scooping that coal up and dumping it into furnaces. Very cool. Love the look of the buildings. Again, I've said this quite a lot now, but just so much more chungus, aren't they? Big, thick, sexy industrial buildings. So much better than vanilla CS1. So now we come to the distribution of electricity, and as we mentioned earlier, those electrical blue mesh zones are no longer a thing anymore. They now must be fed around the city using those high and low voltage power conversion things that we looked at earlier. So now we come on to those bottlenecks that were mentioned in the video. So these will occur in an area of the city that requires more electricity than the grid can currently distribute. This will result in the buildings in that area losing power, of course, as the electricity grid cannot support all of them. And this happens when the area in question only has a few connections to the rest of the city's power grid. So it looks as though expanding electrical infrastructure is now going to be just as important as road infrastructure, because obviously with road infrastructure we want to make sure it's properly planned to avoid traffic bottlenecks. Looks like a similar situation now with electricity bottlenecks. Those transformers and high voltage power lines are going to have to be planned in as much as the roads, which I kind of like, because especially in England, you know, driving down a motorway, you often see these huge high voltage power lines following the roads for miles coming from power distribution points. So, pretty cool. I'm a fan of that mechanic, to be honest. I do like that. So here it's walking us through the electricity info view, which we've seen before. There's nothing massively groundbreaking here. Of course, we have electricity, availability, the trade as well from outside connections, how much batteries are charged, and you know, it's pretty self-explanatory stuff. There's nothing groundbreaking here, I don't think. But again, just a point that we've mentioned on all the other UI interfaces we've seen so far. Much cleaner and nicer compared to CS1, isn't it? Also, the whiteness seems to have gone as well, because I know a lot of people really don't like the white overlays that come in CS1. So they use the toggleable whiteness mod to get rid of it. Seems that's gone now as well, doesn't it? So now we come on to the water stuff. Again, surface water is pretty explanatory. Lakes, rivers and oceans can all be pumped and have sewage dumped into them, vice versa as well. Pretty similar mechanics to CS1 here. There's nothing majorly groundbreaking. So here we come on to this brand new groundwater feature, which we've seen the water pumping stations use alongside the geothermal. Will also make use of groundwater deposits as well, alongside also polluting them. And again, unlike surface water areas, groundwater deposits can temporarily dry up if their usage is higher than their replenishment rate, which is cool. So, you know, it's not just a place of plop and forget. You have to bear in mind how much you're sucking up out of the ground now. A little more micromanagement in the utilities there. So here we come on to some pipe information. So water infrastructure is built into most road types, similar to the electric cables. Although pipes do not have a capacity to keep an eye on, so they won't bottleneck like the low voltage electricity cables do. Both water and sewage pipes are automatically connected to buildings constructed along the road, so we no need to manually drag them in anymore. And then buildings that don't require road access can be connected with separate underground pipe, either single pipes for water or sewage, and as a combined water-sewage dual pipe. So they're actually separated out now, which is cool. Again, a little bit more micromanagement coming in there, isn't it? You've now got to do both types of pipes. Of course, in CS1, they were actually dual pipes, but you just drew them in as one, and then you didn't really have to worry about which one was which. So nice view of the water pumping station. Again, we saw this in the last dev diary. I really don't like that water droplet that's on them. It looks pretty cartoonish. Kind of a homage to CS1 that. I don't really like that, but it might change, we never know. Get our first look as well at the water tower. Love a water tower in the start of the city, right? It's much nicer now, much chunkier, much more realistic looking. So it is able to provide a limited amount of water placed anywhere on the map and isn't affected by any type of pollution. So that's definitely changed. Water towers were affected by ground pollution previously. However, the downside is that it's very costly. I'm disappointed about that. I love my water towers. Hopefully they're not too expensive, because I will be using them for detailing. We get a little shot here as well of the ground pumping station. So maps have underground reservoirs, which we know about. It needs to be placed directly on top. I wonder how much its kind of suction radius is. So do you have to place it right in the middle, or can it just be within the groundwater deposit and it will all move towards that area where it's being sucked from? Interested to see how that's going to work. We've got the advanced water pumping station here as well. We saw this one in the trailer. Is a unique building with a high output of water. Similar to the regular water pumping station, you have to place it on the shoreline. However, its water pumping rate is tenfold compared to the other pumping stations, so you're going to get just high capacity basically. Look at that. Look at the sewage outlet. It's actually throwing little turds out into the water. That's hilarious. I love that. That's so much better animation, isn't it? Did not expect that. Turds confirmed for CS2, it would appear. So of course they're going to pump dirty water back into water service areas, and you want to make sure it's downstream from any kind of intake. Similar mechanics from CS1 returning here. So the wastewater treatment plant will process sewage, purifying it so it can be reused as clean water for the city. That's definitely a new mechanic, isn't it? I don't think that was in CS1, where your sewage treatment would add it back into your water supply. I think that's a new mechanic. And then the pollutants are actually removed and then turned into solid waste, which then has to be processed at landfills or recycling centres. So definitely much more fleshed out utility mechanics happening here now, isn't there? So again, we get more modular upgrade systems for water. We'll have a little look at the example here. So the groundwater pumping station can be upgraded with an advanced filtering system which will reduce pollutants. The sewage outlet can benefit from chemical purification to reduce water pollution, and both the water pumping station and groundwater pumping station can have their intake increased through building extensions, and the waste treatment plant can increase its processing capacity through one or more extra processing unit sub-building upgrades. So just more of that modular upgrade stuff. It's all about increasing capacity and intake values, isn't it? Pretty simple stuff to understand. And then again, we've seen our water and sewage info overlay before, haven't we? Just pretty simple information to take here, isn't it? You know, you want everything to be in the green. Pretty self-explanatory stuff. But otherwise, that is it for electricity and water. Nothing massively groundbreaking in this one. Probably the least interesting so far of the dev diaries, I think. The next two dev diaries are maps and themes, and then climate and seasons. I'm really looking forward to seeing those two, especially maps and themes, alongside seeing how the seasonality is going to work as well. Really looking forward to seeing the 4 seasons. But otherwise, as always, let's please keep that conversation going down below about CS2. Anything here that's been revealed in the electricity and water update that you're massively excited for? Let me know what you're thinking of the seemingly more involved utility administration that's going on. We can now experience electricity bottlenecks. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? As always, anything you're super thumbs up about? Anything tickling your pickle that you're really enjoying? Equally as much if you're hating everything you found out today. Let's keep that discussion going down below. I'm always happy to read your guys' opinions on CS2. There's a real mixed bag, actually. I think it's some people with some very legitimate concerns and some people very excited for what is seemingly coming up. Otherwise, I will leave you with the trailer. I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. And as always, enjoy the rest of your day.
To understand the basic needs of your citizens, you need only look in the mirror. Like you and me, there are a few important things they need to live healthy, happy lives. That includes electricity, water, and sanitation. With these systems in place, everyone in your city has a shot at living their best life. Let's take a look at electricity. When laying roads, you also install low-voltage underground cables that supply electricity to homes, offices, and shops. These cables plug into transformer stations. Transformer stations are also connected to the high-voltage power lines streaming from your city's power plants. They act as a junction where low-voltage cables and high-voltage lines link up. Together, they form the grid that pumps electricity right across your city. There's one drawback. Power lines and electric cables can only carry so much electricity. When demand increases, they can max out, creating a bottleneck. Keep the grid humming by evenly spreading electricity connections around your city. You can also build power lines to import electricity from neighboring cities. Imported energy will save your bacon if local power plants fail to produce enough electricity when demand increases. It will, too. Expect spikes when the thermostat drops and everyone dials up their heaters. Hot weather will cause spikes too, as people flick on air conditioners, fans, and ice machines at the same time. Your power plants might produce more electricity than your city needs. When that happens, you can export it to your neighbors. While this can offset production costs, think it through. By storing excess electricity in emergency battery stations, you have nothing to worry about when demand rises. Emergency battery stations help your city get the most out of solar power plants. Battery stations power the city at night when the plant isn't producing electricity and recharge when they operate during the day. Of course, solar is just one renewable energy source. You can build wind, water, and geothermal power plants too. Fossil fuels are another way to power your city. Or you can go nuclear. Let's talk water and sanitation. Surface water sources are the same as in city skylines. Expect flowing rivers, glittering lakes, and vast, swirling oceans. Groundwater is different. These underground reservoirs replenish over time, so they can run dry if they're drained at a faster rate than they're refilled. They're also susceptible to ground pollution. When they're contaminated, dirty water is pumped into your city's freshwater system. That's bad on every level, mainly because decontamination takes a long time. Build a groundwater pumping station to tap this resource, and a water pumping station to bring surface water into your city's water system. You can also add water to the system with wastewater treatment plants. These plants can process sewage to produce clean water for homes and businesses. There's another way to manage sewage: sewage outlets. They release waste into open water, which can help prevent sewage from backing up. And that's a must when it comes to public health. Bungling waste management can make people seriously ill. That's why you want to keep sewage outlets well away from pumping stations. How can you balance the very human needs of citizens with your ambition as a city builder? It's simple. Imagine living your life down there, day in and day out.